Like what we're doing here at Cube for Two? Click the like and subscribe button to let us know. Also, Cube for Two is now a TCG Player affiliate. Click the link in the show notes for all your shopping needs to help support the channel. Alright guys, let's get started. What's good, Cubers? It's your boy Matt, and I'm back, and today we've got a viewer question and a new archetype to talk about. Let's get started. Nick wants us to know that he loves the content, but he also wants to know about Wildfire variants inside of Cube, which can let us talk about Big Red a little bit also, so I'm really excited to talk about Wildfire. Hoo-wah, here we go. Back in the day, I used to play Wildfire decks after I got slapped around by them. We'll talk about that more later. Wildfire, for those of you who don't know, is a sorcery. It's a four colorless, 2 red. Each player sacrifices 4 lands, then Wildfire deals 4 damage to each creature. So it's supposed to be this symmetrical board wipe where you each sack 4 lands and all your creatures take 4, which should pretty much wipe the board. But back in 1999, Kai Bude piloted a Wildfire deck unlike anyone had ever seen to a World Championship finish. He played 4 copies of Wildfire and 4 copies of Covetous Dragon, which is a red dragon, and everything else is just artifacts. It's like almost mono brown. He played so much artifact ramp, so much artifact mana, that when he cast Wildfire, he didn't care if he sacked his lands because all his rocks were still on the battlefield. Now y'all know I love the templated deck, so what can we learn by looking at Bude's World Championship deck? By the way, this deck was so good that the following year, basically the same deck won, only instead of playing Wildfire, they played Tinker. Fun facts. I went to a F&M prepared to beat Wildfire with a deck just constructed to beat it, and then got eliminated in the first round, and that's when I just got on board and built my own copy of the deck. Anyway, Bude's deck runs mana rocks to help him beat the curve and cast all his stuff early. Then he runs threats that can survive Wildfire. Masticore is able to regenerate, and so it can beat the Wildfire, and it's a colorless card which lets him cast it off his mana rocks after he has Wildfire. Covetous Dragon was a great beat stick at the time. Note the 5 toughness on the card, which lets it survive Wildfire. The drawback on Covetous Dragon is not actually a drawback, and the fact that his mana cost is not red intensive means that he can cast it off a Fire Diamond and his other rocks. So again, he can mostly play Covetous Dragon off of his rocks, and then Bude even ran ramp in his lands with cards like Ancient Tomb and City of Traders, which let him do all of this stuff ahead of curve. What can we draw from this? We need mana rocks. Now, Bude's deck ran 14 mana rocks, which made it 23% of the deck. In Cube, in a 40-card deck, in order to be 23% of a 40-card deck, we need 9 rocks. Bude ran 4 copies of Wildfire, which made it 6% of the deck. In Cube, 6% of our 40-card deck means we need 2.5 copies of Wildfire inside of it, so preferably 3. That's going to be a problem that we're going to talk about later. And then lastly, Bude's deck ran 8 finishers, 13% of the deck, so you will probably need around 5 finishers in your deck inside a cube. And all of this relates to density and how many copies of things you need to run in your cube overall so that your players have access to 9 rocks, 2.5 Wildfires, and 5 finishers when they construct their cube deck. You'll notice that these numbers only add up to about 16 or 17 cards of your cube deck, and that does give you a lot of flexible spots. We're going to talk more about what you might do with those spots a little bit later. The big problem we encounter is that we need probably 3 copies of Wildfire, bare minimum 2. And the bigger your cube is, the more redundancy you have to have inside your cube to make the Wildfire deck work. Let's look at some possible Wildfire variants you could be playing. There is obviously Wildfire itself and Burning of Xinye, which is basically an exact copy, almost a reprint of Wildfire. Now, if you are only running these 2 cards inside your cube probably can't be bigger than about 400 cards in order for the Wildfire deck to be draftable. Once you hit about 450 cards, you only have about a 60% chance of both copies of this even being available in draft at the same time, which means this deck is never going to get built. Players are just going to pass them around the table. So that is a major drawback of the Wildfire deck, is it functions better in smaller cubes. Now, there are a few replacement effects that we can run in addition to Wildfire and Burning of Xingye. We could also play cards like Destructive Force and Devastation. You'll notice that Destructive Force, each player sacrifices 5 lands and deals 5 damage to each creature, which is 1 more damage than Wildfire. For me, I think the big drawback is that 1 extra mana. There feels like such a difference between 6 and 7 mana, but this does create the extra density so that larger cubes can play Wildfire-style decks. And then, of course, there's Devastation, which is an even more efficient version of this effect, as it kills all creatures and all lands. The big drawback here being that you can't play a fatty and then cast Devastation and your fatty live through it, whereas your big fat creature might live through a Wildfire or a Destructive Force. Devastation is going to kill it, so sequencing matters with Devastation. Wildfire is technically a non-blue control deck, even though sometimes it does actually play blue. You are not the beatdown, which means you need to be able to live to the later stages of the game. So don't be afraid to draft burn effects to help keep you alive. Lightning Bolt is okay. Pyroclasm and Storm's Wrath are better. These are effects that you can use to keep the board clear until you either A, draw your Wildfire, or B, have the resources to cast your Wildfire and it be asymmetrical. Some people are big fans of playing cards like Ember Swallower. I'm not. I think Ember Swallower is just a bad card. I've even tried it out myself. The fact of the matter is it's a 9 mana Wildfire, and that is just too much. And if you play it for 4 mana and then have to wait and untap to monstrous it, anything could happen to it. Also, it doesn't actually wrath the board. If you're looking for another copy of Wildfire, might I suggest leaving the color red and going to blue and trying Upheaval. I do want to caution you though, Upheaval only works if you have built the artifact version of Wildfire. We'll talk about the green version later. But if you're playing the artifact version of Wildfire, then you can tap out all your artifacts, cast your Upheaval, and then with any extra mana you have floated, you can start slamming all your artifacts back down on the board, using each new artifact to cast the next one. As a matter of fact, the artifact version, the blue-red version of Wildfire in Cube, is probably the best one. If you're going to go this route, I strongly encourage you to add cantrips and counterspells to those extra slots we were talking about. The cantrips will help you dig through your deck and find your Wildfire pieces, both your copies of Wildfire and your rocks, so that you can cast it on time. And just having some counterspells and being able to interact with the stack is also a strong upside for going the blue-red version of Wildfire. Now, if you don't want to do that, there is a green version of the Wildfire deck, and you don't want to play mana dorks. You're going to cast Wildfire, you're going to wrath the board, they're not going to be around after the spell resolves. So if you're going the green route, you don't play mana dorks. Instead, what you use is Spell Ramp to help you get ahead on lands. This way, when you Wildfire, you've still got lands on the battlefield, whereas hopefully your opponent has none. There is a major drawback, though, to being in a Gruul Wildfire deck, and that is you don't have an efficient way to cantrip through your deck and find your copies of Wildfire. Most of the time, it's more of a Gruul beat-down mid-range deck that when Wildfire comes out, it feels great, but the rest of the time, it's kind of meh. There are some hidden tech things you can do with some of those extra spots. You could play cards like Crucible of Worlds. This allows you to Wildfire sooner, even if you lose your 4 lands, because if Crucible of Worlds is already out, you can start replaying your lands from the graveyard, which feels very, very good against your opponent. You can even play the new Wrenn and 6 Planeswalker, because she also allows you to pull lands out of your graveyard and put them back in your hand. You'll notice that I don't list the Ramunap Excavator here. That's because he'll die during the wildfire, so you don't want to try and play him inside of this deck. All of this begs the question, Matt, how do I win? Well, now that we've wrathed the board and we've killed all their creatures, we stick a huge threat and win the game. Inferno Titan, Honored Hydra, I like both of these creatures. Inferno Titan can come down and help murder the board as well every time he swings. I like Honored Hydra because even when it dies, you can embalm it to draw an extra copy out of your graveyard should your opponent be lucky enough to get rid of it. And you could even play a simple, 5/5 flyer like Thundermaw Hellkite because all of these creatures have one important thing in common, and that's their power toughness. In the Wildfire deck, it is extremely important that your threats have 5 toughness so that they can survive Wildfire the first time and maybe even the second time. Still, there is a much more simple solution rather than playing big fat creatures like these, and that is that you could just play Planeswalkers. Wildfire deals 4 damage to creatures, it doesn't deal 4 damage to Planeswalkers. So walkers like Chandra Torch of Defiance can help you ramp into your Wildfire even sooner, and then still be there after it resolves. Karn Scion of Urza interacts well with all your mana rocks because the tokens he makes get bigger with every rock you control, plus his +1 ability helps you dig through your deck and find your Wildfire. And Nissa Vital Force will wake up that 1 land you have remaining and turn it into a 5/5 and allow you to slap your opponent around. You don't have a land? That's cool. Minus Nissa and return that land from your graveyard to your hand. Now you can play it and start plussing her and have something to swing with. This also forces me to bring up the Wildfire deck's biggest weakness, and that is your opponent's Planeswalkers. Wildfire's not going to kill them, so you need to think about trying to have some kind of solution ready for them, be that Storm's Wrath or the Burn from earlier, or already having a fatty on the board so you can kill them pretty quickly after the Wildfire resolves. As a result of Planeswalkers being in Cube more and more, I have noticed a significant decrease in the power of the Wildfire deck because every deck just seems to have walkers. This is another reason why I think the blue-red version of the Wildfire deck is just a little bit better, because you can hold up counter magic and let your opponent's creatures land because you don't care, you're going to wrath them away, but then use that counter magic to stop the walkers from coming down. It just gives you a little more flexibility in how you deal with your opponent's threats. Well, that's going to do it for today, Cubers. Nick, hope you enjoyed the Wildfire lesson. Now, big news for all of you at home. Cube4two now has a podcast? What? With Mrs. Cube4two as the guest host? That's pretty sweet. We're already on Spotify and Stitcher. We should be on Apple Podcasts within the next couple of weeks. Name of the podcast, just like the channel, Cube4two and you. We spend this week talking about Ikoria playtests and how those Ikoria cards are working out in the early tests inside our cube. So if you're curious about how that's working out, be sure to check out the podcast. I'll even put a link in the show notes below, and I've even put up the first episode on this channel so you can scroll down and find it. That being said, if you've got episode suggestions for this channel or things you might like us to talk about on our podcast, feel free to leave it in the comments below and we'll give it a go. Like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter at Cube4two. If you want to support the channel, the best way to do it is through the TCG Player affiliate link in the notes below. Please, anytime you want to pick up something at TCG Player, click that link. It really helps out a lot. It means a lot to us. I'll see you next week. And as always, and until next time, shuffle up and keep cubing, my friends.